Weekly Download, a podcast about interesting games, industry news.
Brought to you by Big Games Machine.
On the topic of games and advertising, Seattle Sounders back in the day would have the Xbox 360 sponsorship and Xbox.
True.
And then that led to issues with PlayStation being like, well, so if you were going to have, Seattle Sounders Clint Dempsey era on the front cover of your FIFA, you couldn't be having that on the PlayStation with the Xbox thing plastered on it. So I can't remember the specifics. There's been too many FIFAs, too many cover athletes, as they are known in America, over the years to remember if you made it onto the PlayStation one.
Who is it that Nintendo sponsor? Baseball team. Is that Seattle? It's Seattle, isn't it? Isn't it their baseball team that they own a stake in?
The Mariners?
Yeah.
I think so.
I think they used to have a really big stake and then they sold a lot of it off, but they still have like 10%. So they, like this year, they've got Switch 2 logos on the sleeves, and that's all I know. But I'm fairly sure that's the thing.
I missed the Fiorentina Nintendo shirt. Iconic, of course, one of the best kits.
And someone had Sega. Was that another Italian team?
Arsenal had Sega. Hence,
Sega.
I picked it for the BGM branding.
It's a good choice.
I have not got any sponsorship deal from Sega there, just for clarity.
It's a good
if they want to
choice.
sponsor me, hit me up.
Oh yeah, true. They could sponsor. I forgot we're doing a podcast. And so yeah, come on, Sega.
I'll take a Red Bull sponsorship.
But yeah,
Sega
anyway,
sponsorship.
we should stop talking amongst ourselves about weird football sponsorships and baseball, and say hello to everybody. Welcome back to another edition, the third edition. I don't know how long we're going to keep counting them like this. But
we'll be into Final Fantasy numbers soon enough.
True. Welcome back to the Weekly Download, brought to you, of course, by Big Games Machine. Today, yet again, I am Tom, and I'm joined by my trusty co-host. Although last week I was the co-host, and then this week you are. I don't know. I guess we're both co-hosts.
But we're going for a kind of dual. It's like in McLaren. We don't really want to say there's a number one and number two driver. Papaya rules this. But yes, I am Jack, joined by Tom, and we are happy to talk to you folks again using our, has it been 10 odd years, I think, of combined experience, more than that.
10 or more within, many more outside of playing, complaining, analysing from a distance, still analysing, but a little bit closer. And we're back again this week, and we've got, I feel like I'm going to say this every week, but I think today we've got another really good set of stories. We've got some really cool stuff to look at, interesting stuff to take a little deep dive in, do some analysis. So, I mean, if we quickly run through what we're going to look at today, we covered it last week, Remedy. We're back again. Remedy have made it 2 weeks in a row, which they might be, that might be an achievement at some point. We'll
have a leaderboard going of the most featured.
Yeah, but not for 2 weeks in a row. Remedy are being featured, but not for good reasons. So maybe they'll want to stray away. We're also going to be taking a look at Xbox, more murmurings and conversations around Xbox and its position on console exclusivity, which will be interesting. And then finally, and Jack, I'll let you introduce this one because this is one of your stories for this week.
Yeah, we've got
some Steam game launches that we're going to be taking a look at.
We're going to take a quick detour into China and look at Escape from Duckov, which has sold over 1 million as of recording. Depending on when you are listening to this, could be 2 million. That bandwagon is currently running, and we're going to take a quick look at that and what that means for the games industry in China and beyond.
So yeah, it's a globe-trotting tour. I'm not sure where Remedy are based, but I believe it's in the Scandinavian. I feel it sounds like it. It sounds like it to me. So
we'll do a map as well of where everyone is based. We'll do a leaderboard and a map,
interactive map
to keep track. So I think let's fire away, which is the segue into Firebreak, our first story of the day. Tom, what is on fire?
Yeah, Firebreak and. Yeah, I mean, it's what I said before. We touched on on Remedy last week. That was more focused on FBC Firebreak, which was their Control multiplayer spin-off, and which really has underperformed. I'd recommend going and listening to that segment on last week's episode, because we spoke a lot about that. But this week we're taking a look at the fact that Tero Virtala, who was the Remedy CEO and was the CEO for 9 years, since 2016, has resigned with immediate effect this week, following the recent lowering of Remedy's financial outlook. And a lot of the reason why that outlook was lowered does seem to be tied to this underperformance of FBC Firebreak. So we've got that connection here. Remedy have gone from previously projecting a profit increase this year for the financial year to now revising that to a decrease in its operating profit. So yeah, it feels like the kind of situation where Virtala has tried to take Remedy in a certain direction after a sustained period of real success with these single-player games. You know, Alan Wake 2, we've had Control as well. They've wanted to try and pivot into the live service pot of gold that we all know exists and we all know that everyone's clamoring to get a slice of. But it just doesn't seem to have worked, and I think that's how the situation has ended up how it has for him, unfortunately.
So he has gone, and he has naturally been replaced. His replacement's quite interesting, isn't it? It's the co-founder.
Yeah, I'm probably going to butcher this pronunciation, but Marcus Merky is now at the helm temporarily, I believe. This is a temporary move while they look for a new person to lead Remedy forward. But yeah, I think it's really interesting that we've seen Remedy bring someone in, even if temporarily, who's been there since the start. I think, to me, it feels like they want to, I think anyway, I think they want to ensure that investors have some confidence in the direction that Remedy's going. I think they want to bring in a safe set of hands to really focus back in on what Remedy does well, and that's these single-player games. Yeah. You know, we know that a Control sequel is in the works, but it feels like they're course-correcting from this spin into live service, and now they're saying, right, let's settle down. We're going to bring in Marcus. So let's build up some confidence again and get things back to normal.
Yes, confidence for investors, confidence for players. As you said, it's an IP. People know the IP. It has established success in the single-player market, but that doesn't guarantee that it's going to convert into live service. Saturated market, as you've said, it has its dominant titles. Having someone at the helm who has already been with the series is quite interesting. I think it's worth people comparing this to our story last week about Assassin's Creed.
Yes.
Where that was a series that had the main man at the helm who was then left, and there's some flux as to what will happen to that series and franchise. This is a kind of reverse of that, where it's someone who's been there from the start, is back in charge, and you'd expect things to return to how they were. So it's quite interesting. It could reassure those investors. It might be too late for that. We don't know. But it's interesting because, as we spoke about with the Assassin's Creed, there's only so many of these top guys around.
Yeah, who know what they're doing. That's a really good point, and that maybe is why that decision to go internally for now has come about. They want to make sure that someone is taking on the job at not a perfect time for Remedy, who is comfortable within the company culture, who knows the people, who knows the direction the company is trying to go in. I think probably the last point on this, and what I think is really interesting, is over the last couple of years, we've seen so many layoffs. That's mainly been in executive positions, I guess might be the right word to use, developers, marketers, all these lower level roles. And I say that not in an insulting way, but just to reflect what we've instead had here, where someone who is very high up in Remedy, you can't get much higher, is being held accountable for decisions that have been made by the company. And it's something that I don't think we've seen a lot of. I know there's a lot of heat on people like Phil Spencer at Xbox, and we'll get onto Xbox in a moment, but there's a lot of heat on CEOs, on presidents of some of the really big players in this industry. And those executive positions tend to not be where people are being forced out. It tends to be lower down. So, again, it's interesting that we're seeing some executive accountability for a decision that was made and a decision that looks to have been the wrong one. So maybe we might see more of that now. Maybe we won't. But it's worth highlighting because we don't see it often.
Yes, one to keep an eye on, and I'm sure not the last executive shuffle we are going to cover on the show. So yes, one to keep an eye on there. Now, you have touched on Xbox, which does lead us on to our second story. Console exclusives are antiquated, says the headline here.
Antiquated, I think.
Well, yeah, it was that antiquated that everyone's making up words now.
We'll go for it. Hey, we're not here for the pronunciations. We're here for the facts, Jack. And that's what we're going to give people. So we know at this point that Xbox, I think we can speak in plain terms, Xbox does not care about console exclusivity anymore. Xbox and the leadership at Xbox is trying to distance the brand of Xbox from the Xbox Series X, the Xbox Series S. I'm saying Xbox so many times, it's like a bit of a tongue twister.
That was their marketing campaign. This is
True.
An Xbox.
Anything's an Xbox. And this interview that Sarah Bond has done with Mashable has just reinforced that. It's very clear that Xbox is doubling down on this position. This argument really centers around the fact that in the modern industry, you've got huge cross-platform live service games, your Call of Duties, Minecraft, Fortnite, Roblox. All of these games are super successful and they're not tied to a platform. One of the real benefits, one of the real attractions of these kind of games is that within reason, you can kind of play them anywhere. You can play them on your phone, you can play them on your PC, you can play on PlayStation, Xbox, Nintendo in some cases. And you can play those across platforms. You can cross-play. You can play with people on any platform. And that's because people, in her eyes, and I think some people would certainly agree, players now care less about where they're playing and they care about who they're playing with. They want to play with friends. They want to play the same experiences as their friends. So from Xbox, it's a case of, well, then why do we need console exclusive now? We don't need to make people buy Doom on Xbox when we can make them buy Doom on PlayStation. And if I'm honest, I kind of get it. I definitely get it from Xbox's side. And
Xbox's
I know you've got some thoughts on this.
Well, it's Nintendo is the obvious kind of counterpoint to this, where their whole motive has been these games are only available on Nintendo systems. It was such a huge thing for Pokemon to suddenly appear on mobile. Not even talking about consoles, just mobile. For years, you'd search Pokemon in the App Store and there'd be all kinds of knockoff shovelware nonsense because there was nothing. But finally, something official appeared, and Nintendo realized we should have got on this mobile game.
There's money to be made. So. But with that being said, I think it's very clear. So Xbox will be anywhere. They don't care. I think Sony are very much in a position at the moment where I think Sony are kind of figuring out what their position is. We're seeing a lot of Sony first-party games eventually come to PC now, but in a lot of cases, especially with the, those kind of staple single-player, huge budget games, it's 2 or 3 years after the line. Helldivers 2 came out concurrently on PC, but that wasn't... It's a PlayStation published game, but it's not necessarily a PlayStation game in the same way that Horizon is Astrobot.
The issue with Helldivers was when there was all the confusion about signing in with a PlayStation account, and that led to a huge impact on the player base. And so that's almost like foisting consoles on non-console players. So that has
Which they don't like.
Yes.
Historically, and they won't like. But
so
what's really interesting to me, Jack, is that as much as Xbox are saying this, as much as the Xbox position seems to be like, hey, you know, exclusives kind of suck nowadays, like, why are we still doing this? They're saying this, but at the same time, you know, we've already seen it with like Doom, I think is or maybe not Doom. I'm trying to think, like Indiana Jones. Sorry, that's a good example. And Forza Horizon 6, both come into PS5, but we've seen with Indiana Jones, and reportedly we'll see the same with the new Forza game, is that as much as Xbox don't want exclusives, they're happy to have timed exclusives, because it seems like they've got a position of, hey, these games are going to come to your PlayStation eventually, but we're going to wait a little while, so that we're going to have a bit of FOMO. We're going to have some degree of exclusivity. So, you know, maybe, you know, if you want them immediately and if you want them on Game Pass for free, you know, come and buy an Xbox, come and buy a PC. So they're conceding some ground to Sony, but they're not in a position yet where they're happy to say, hey, yeah, you guys go at it. And I think if we ever saw Game Pass come to PlayStation on Nintendo Switch, that would be, to me, really putting actions behind some of these words from Xbox. But at the moment, it still feels like they're quite happy to sit on the fence and see what the best option might be for them.
Yeah, because they're still figuring out some strategies. We've already talked on the show about Games Pass and some changes with that, because you could argue that the change from hardware into software is that their new console of choice is giving players Game Pass and advertising Game Pass as having these IPs on, in that you can't play it on PlayStation yet. But if you just subscribe to Game Pass, you can have all of these.
Yeah, straight away.
I think that's the tunnel they are going through right now. So
yeah,
another one.
I agree, and I think one last point on this would just be, and I think we have touched on it briefly, but I think the biggest, to me, it's all about how Sony reacts to this. I think, you know, if I'm wrong in the future, someone clip this and send it to me. I cannot see a situation in the foreseeable future, as things are now, where Nintendo are opening up their major IP. And I'm not just talking about Mario Kart Tour or doing games on mobile. I'm talking mainline games from Nintendo IPs coming to other platforms. I cannot see it. I cannot see it at all. But I think for Sony, there's a lot of pressure on Sony. I think Sony's position seems to be, we believe in exclusives because we believe that our exclusives are brilliant games that are worth buying a system for. And whether that's right or wrong, I think we can look at the catalogue of Sony games and say there's a lot of quality there that people will miss out on if they're not playing on PC or PlayStation. But to me, Sony's the one where it will be a case of, you know, could you ever see PlayStation games launching on Xbox? Maybe, maybe not. I feel like if this continues to work for Xbox, PlayStation would be silly not to turn around and think, how much money could we make doing this? Is it worth the extra money at the cost of potentially diluting our brands somewhat? But this is all just speculating. We know what Xbox are doing because they've proven, you know, time and time again that this is their strategy. But for everyone else, especially for Sony, it's one to keep an eye on and see.
No strategy is perfect. Nobody is going to take to it like a duck to water. But some ducks that have taken a lot of water is our
1 million
story. Millions
pints of water.
Escape from Duckov. You heard that correct. I have not mispronounced Tarkov, like I may have mispronounced something earlier. This is the game of the now. It has sold over 1 million as of recording within a few days of launch, and it's not like this is a £3, £4, $5, depending on your currency game either. It does cost about 20. I think, trying to do conversions in the head. It looks
we'll
like
go
a
with 20.
Game
it sounds like a good number
on its face, and it sounds like a knockoff of Tarkov with ducks and a focus on PvE, not PvP. But it's a paid game. It's not shovelware. People are clearly interested in buying this game, and it has some big names behind it. It's published by Billy. So the majority of the audience appears to be Chinese, but it does have a global appeal. So that has some interesting insights and questions about Steam in China.
Yeah, I think when, who would have thought it, before we record these, we do have a brief conversation about what we're going to talk about. Because otherwise they'd be even worse than you might think they are. I kid. But I think what's really interesting about this, and what we both really, came to focus on, was, as much as this is a new game from, Billy isn't a small publisher, but Team Soda is a small team within Billy. But this isn't just a new game appearing from perhaps relatively nowhere to a lot of people and doing really well. For us, the real interesting point here is this is just the latest example of the growing presence of Chinese players, Chinese developers, Chinese publishers on Steam. And I think people forget that this is quite a new phenomenon. Steam hasn't been something that's had a massive proportion of Chinese players until very recently. But in that time, since we've started seeing more players from China use Steam, that population has exploded. And if we've got some data, but I think what's really interesting is that simplified Chinese is now the second highest language used on Steam. And when we look at Escape from Duckov, need to make sure I use the right name, 70% of the reviews for this so far are from China. It's from Chinese players, which begs the question of how does, and not in a confrontational way, but how does the traditional West and other parts of Asia that for a long time we've all been collectively in one kind of video game bubble, now there's a huge newcomer to that, and how will that change things, especially on PC, because it's such a huge proportion of PC players that are now coming from China. Jack, I know you're really an expert on this kind of thing. This is what you know about. So, I mean, what do you think?
The perception people have of the games industry within China is that it is overwhelmingly only focused on mobile, which is not untrue. But you look at perhaps the biggest success stories to come out of China, Genshin, Black Myth, both of those available on consoles. PC gaming in China is often seen as a kind of an entry point. Consoles are seen as a luxury. It's why there's not been too much of a push for local console development. Wukong was huge because it was a console game, which really was different. A lot of the games we see are PC and mobile crossplay. But PC itself, we're seeing 70% of the reviews on average on Steam now are from Chinese users, I think, for this game and other games. Chinese gamers spend more on average year upon year than other gamers. So as well as having a presence in terms of the language, it also encourages developers to think, is my game localized in Chinese? Should I localize my game in Chinese? Because it's an audience.
Are we reaching out to players from China?
Yes.
It's obviously our bread and butter. It is public relations, and it's a question for us. It's a question for, potential developers who are looking to release a game. Do you want to completely skip out what is now a huge market? Obviously, English likely will continue to be the biggest language on Steam. It's to some extent the world's language. But you don't, are you prepared to miss out on potential profit, on potential players from, such a huge now population? And it's only going to get bigger and bigger. We see the data all the time. The industry is growing financially. It's growing by player base. Those players are also going to come from China. That money is also going to come from China. So it's a huge opportunity. And I think for me, I'm really excited to see just where this goes. I know Sony has a program that supports studios from countries like China, as part of this desire to fund studios from the country to tell new stories. I think if we go off slightly and look at, the mythologies that we often see in video games, or the cultures, or the kind of myths that we see, it does tend to be very either Western in nature, very like Americanized, I'd say. Even in Europe, I think a lot of games have very much got that American influence. Or if you look east, we see a lot of stuff that's like, obviously Japan and Japanese culture and Japanese history plays a massive role in a lot of video games. But now, and Wukong is a great example of this, we're starting to see developers and studios from China who are telling stories about China, about Chinese mythology, about Chinese folklore. And, you know, as a historian, you know, in my past, to me, that's really interesting. And I think just to bring it back to where we started, the facts are that the Chinese games industry is not going to slow down. It's not going to reduce in size, in scale, in investment, in ambition from where we are now. So again, I feel like we've said this a lot today, but this is one you're going to have to keep an eye on.
Yeah,
because you cannot ignore it.
It would be a bad decision to ignore it, or almost ignorant, just saying, "Oh, this game's come out of China, therefore it doesn't affect me as a developer or a publisher sitting in Los Angeles right now. I'm focused on the American market." It doesn't work like that anymore. It's very much a global platform. I'm sure we'll talk in future shows about the size of Steam and what that means with, you know, Epic trying to compete and the monopoly Steam has on the PC market, but just back to the facts.
We'll never run away from those conversations, and we're always going to have them. We're never going to run away. We're always going to run towards them. And on the topic of running, let's get into the rapid rundown. I feel like that's just become the name of this segment. And look at that. You'll always get the segues. You'll always get the segues in. We haven't really touched on money today, but I think this is a story you found, Jack, and
fascinating.
It's fascinating. It's funny. I think it just goes to show that there's these economies within games that are just baffling to anyone on the outside. And Jack, please tell us about this Counter-Strike story.
If you're listening to this, we presume you're fairly into your games. Otherwise, thanks for stumbling upon this. So. Hopefully we can convert you. But trying to explain to someone that the game itself, you can download that game for free, but the game is worth $7 billion until it then loses $1 billion in just the items that the characters on screen are wearing. And you've got someone going,
and this is Counter-Strike. This is CS.
Counter-Strike 2.
This is CSGO.
It's skin market, cosmetics. People trade, invest in that as they would stocks. And an update pushed by the developers has affected this market and wiped $1 billion estimated off of its just value. So going from an estimated 7 billion to an estimated 6 billion. The update,
the GDP of CSGO has been crushed.
Trying to explain this in very, very simple terms. It is the rapid rundown. I've got it written out here. So forgive me for reading out my notes, but I need to get this right.
No, go for it.
The new system allows lower value skins to be converted into high-end gloves and knives. Okay,
so and that's the stuff that people want, I guess.
Convert your hat into a knife. Increases the supply of these rare items, and then drives down the prices, which has led to people calling this a crypto-style rug pull.
I mean, I appreciate this we're trying to be as quick as we can here, but I kind of get that sentiment. I feel like this is, if you're releasing this update without warning people, you have to expect this. You know, yes. I think there's a lot to be said about the CSGO markets and this like unregulated just way of just so much money going into these kind of things. But with that much money being in it, releasing an update that affects it dramatically without giving anyone some foresight on that, which, let's be honest, if they'd had announced it before, it would have had the same effect to probably a large extent. But
at least there was the transparency.
Yeah,
it makes me think of the CrowdStrike update shenanigans from before, where the CrowdStrike pressed a button, said, "Hey, we've done an update," and it put a bunch of systems down. It has led to an ongoing lawsuit from tons of airlines, especially suing CrowdStrike, going, "We've lost all
We
this
might get
business."
some. Valve might be getting in trouble, but it's a rug pull. And another rug pull, which we've seen this week, is after 7 years, The Sims Mobile is getting shut down.
Yeah.
So it's the
the
delisting is happening this week. The servers don't shut down until January, but not only are we see this is a huge blow again for Sims. I know, Jack, you're a massive Sims fan. You're always complaining
fan, because where the franchise is right now is very much
Not
away
good.
from, let's see how many people we can trap in this basement, or what funny things can
Or a
we do
swimming pool.
with like a 4-wall start and a garden, and just see where it goes from there. Playing God, basically. The Sims Mobile, yes, ended service after 7 years. It's not the first big title to do this, but it begs questions of how long can a mobile game run for? I have two extremes. Tom, you've already seen the notes, so I won't ask you to guess, but we'll give our audience a little bit to guess.
I could guess.
You could guess.
I could close my eyes.
If I was to say, what would one of the longest examples be in terms of years that you could think was a good run?
What is a game?
A mobile game from launch.
You know what? I'm just going to pluck one off the top of my head. I'm going to go for something that I think would have lasted around 13 years. Say The Simpsons Tapped Out.
You are bang on the money there, Mr. Burns. That lasted 13 years, which was a very solid run, and a huge IP as well. Some games will collab with IPs and have a naturally limited time they can run that for. This was from the Wild West days of mobile gaming as well, all the way through to very recently. The shortest is an outstanding story here. Definitely one for explaining in another time.
Nami Mori Boys?
Yes, Wave Nanamori
3 days.
Boys.
3 days. This does sound like a story for another time.
So
3 days.
Anime game launched day one. They realized there were some issues, so after 3 days, they put it into maintenance, where it stayed, and basically no one except the developers could play it until. So
what we're saying is, if you're like devastated about The Sims Mobile, count yourself lucky, because you could have got 3 days out of it.
All the Namamori boys.
That feels like the takeaway from that. And then the last little story today, one for if you're a developer. If you're a developer and you're listening, this is one for you to take note of in particular, I'd say. So a new study surrounding Steam and wish lists has come out, and a lot of what it looks at is, okay, if you get a wish list, how do you convert that to a sale? Jack, we see it a lot that people wish lists are hugely important. I mean, they're one of the best determinators pre-launch of the interest in your game, how well it could do in that first few weeks going into months and year. But some of the findings from this survey have shown that you cannot just take a look at wish list when you're taking a look at how well can something do. One of the really strong findings that emerged was the fact that, and this might be quite obvious, but it's good to know, is that your first week user reviews, there's a real correlation between the more positive they are, the more likely you are to convert wish lists. Obviously, the opposite are true. If you have poor reviews, it's less likely to convert. It feels kind of obvious, but I think it's good to know these kind of things. And one of the other observations was that there was somewhat of a trend between a Steam page being listed for a shorter amount of time before release, and that leading to higher conversion in wish lists. Now, I think that is slightly... I feel like we need more context on that, which is the fact that it really comes down to this idea of old wish lists versus new wish lists, which this is something that, again, the survey somewhat takes a look at. But it's the idea that if you have a Steam page up for 5 years and you get 10,000 wish lists and then you launch a game, if you got 8,000 of those in the first year, the page was live, and only 2,000 in the last year, versus if someone gets 5,000, but they're all from a week before the game comes out, those fresher wish lists are going to convert more. But it's an interesting study. Wish lists are super important, but it's nice to consider other things that can impact sales. And we'll include, as we will with all the stories, I know in the first few episodes, we've only included really the links to the big stories that we discuss, but we'll make sure that all of these other stories were included in the information in the description, so you can go check them out. But that's the rapid rundown. It wasn't very rapid today, but I think we had some good conversations, and that's what we aim to do here. We aim to inform. We aim to and teach.
Somewhat speedy stroll, but yes,
we'll take a speedy stroll.
Work on that. But the point is, as always, we were trying to give you the key stories from the past week with a bit of comment and analysis on it, so you don't have to. Or maybe you've read it, you've had a thought, and we've presented something different.
True.
All good.
And of course, we know that, if you're listening, you might be a fan of podcasts, but it's also worth mentioning, and we'll keep banging the drum. If you'd rather read your stories, if you're a fan of, sitting down for a morning, afternoon coffee and having a quick browse through some of the biggest headlines for the day, we also have the weekly download newsletter, which is on a Friday via LinkedIn, which we'll link below. But then we also have the daily download, which is 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. You can sign up using the link below. You get all the stories straight to your inbox. Jack and I sit down and curate those every day to try and make sure that we're giving people really good stories, really good information, and ultimately keeping you informed on the daily about everything that's going on in the industry. But that's us today. That's a wrap. We've done all the promo. We've told you all the news. We've given our thoughts, and we've come to the end of another weekly download.
Like a mobile game, we're going to delist now, not forever. We'll be back
for
after
7
this
days.
Short update of 7 days maintenance, and we hope to see you on the next one. So that is a goodbye from me and a goodbye from Tom, and we'll catch you on the next one.